The Granger Movement. The Granger Movement was the first stage of agrarian crusade of the late 19th century, in which farmers voiced their dissatisfaction with deteriorating economic conditions and agriculture's declining status in a rapidly industrializing nation. The Patriots of Husbandry, or the Grange, was founded in 1867 in Washington, D.C. by Oliver Hudson Kelley. Railroads. Railroads were the field where many of the greatest Gilded Age fortunes were built. With the opening of the West, railroad construction reached record proportions just after the Civil War and during the 1870s and 80s. Railroad mileage rose from 35,000 miles to over 163,000 miles in just the span of 25 years, almost a five-fold increase. Railroads became the knit which held together the growing nation, creating by their very existence opportunities for entrepreneurs in other fields. Railroads at this time also became a public unity, meaning that the public used them as transport, just another reason to support this system. Granger Laws. As the political power of organized farmers grew in the 1870s, agrarian representatives in the state legislatures, aided by spokesmen for certain business interests, pushed through legislation in Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota that collectively were known as Granger Laws. These laws varied from state to state, but generally they sought to outlaw the widespread abuses by railroads, established maximum rates in some instances, and created regulatory agencies to administer and enforce the laws. Beyond their immediate importance, the Granger Laws marked an early attempt by a previously rural nation to adjust the conditions and challenges of an increasingly urban and industrial society. Block voting. Block voting was started during the Granger movement. It was a voting on behalf of an organization. A single vote by a representative, typically of the labor union, on behalf of the members of his or her organization, weighted according to the number of members. Munn
versus
Illinois. Munn versus Illinois was one of the Granger cases and involved the validity of an 1871 Illinois law. During the height of the 1870s depression, the Illinois legislature responded to the pleas of the embattled farmers by enacting a law that established a maximum charge that could be imposed by grain storage and facility operators. A Chicago warehouse firm known as Munn & Scott was found guilty in 1872 of violating the law. Munn & Scott appealed the matter to the Illinois Supreme Court, which affirmed the ruling to the lower court, and the federal courts up to the United States Supreme Court in 1876, which rendered a decision by a 7-2 vote in March 1877.
Case.
In a similar case, in 1886, the U.S. Supreme Court decision in the case of Wabash, St. Louis, and Public Railway Company versus Illinois declared that the states could not regulate commerce that went beyond their boundaries. Instead, regulation had to come from the federal government. The decision provided the basis for the formation of the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887.
Sherman
Antitrust
Act
of
1890.
The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was the first measure passed by the U.S. Congress to prohibit trusts. A trust was an arrangement by which stockholders in several companies transferred their shares to a single set of trustees. In exchange, the stockholders received a certificate entitling them to a specific share of consolidated earnings of the jointly managed company. Collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is the idea in which workers cooperate to achieve a common goal. In collective bargaining, representatives of workers will negotiate with the management to secure gains for all workers, as opposed to the individual worker negotiating for him or herself. The concept greatly increased the power of the workers to pressure for concessions, increased the power for permanence of the union movement. Many people during the Gilded Age were frustrated with the businesses taking advantage of the workers as well as the consumers. There was a growing call in the late 1800s for the government to step in and regulate the government, ensuring a safety and fair prices. The best example can be seen in the Granger movement. The Grangers called for regulation of the companies that were charging unfair rates and exercising power over transportation. Knights
Of
labor. The rise in industrial capitalism, with its widening gap between rich and poor, generated the union movement's transformation. At its inception, the KOL comprised 9 tailors whose leader was Uriah S. Stevens. The organization believed that its predecessors had failed by limiting membership. The Knights proposed to organize both skilled and unskilled workers in the same union and open its doors to blacks and women. By the early 1800s, the group had emerged as a national force and had dropped its initial secrecy. They sought to include within their ranks everyone but doctors, bankers, lawyers, liquor producers, and gamblers. American.
Federation
Of.
Labor.
The main goal of the American Federation of Labor was to keep things simple and to avoid the pitfalls that the other unions at the time were facing. Reform. Some early reformers included Thomas Nast and Jane Addams. Thomas Nast was born in Landau, Germany, on September 26, 1840. In 1846, his father sent his mother, Apollona Abris, and him and his sister to New York City. He joined them in 1849 when his enlistment was up. Is mostly known for his political cartoons. He was a radical Republican, a liberal, progressive, nationalistic, and Protestant wing of the party. Nast was a fierce supporter for the Union cause who skillfully used allegory and melodrama in his art to support the cause he believed was just. James
Adams.
James Adams was born in 1860 and is remembered primarily as the founder of the Settlement House movement. She and her friend Ellen Starr founded Hull House in the slums of Chicago in 1889. She also remembered as the first American woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.